Good afternoon, everybody. Joe Martin Metalhead here. Hope you're going well. Now, I'm looking at this map of the world today to basically explain to you how much I have paid to really travel the world, and how little you should pay to go different places. Okay, we're gonna set the prime example. My home is in the United Kingdom. Now, I've been in the United Kingdom since July 2015, give or take a few months away back in Australia. And I've traveled to many different countries since I emigrated here. Like, when I arrived in the UK, I was on 33 nations. That was 8 years ago. I'm now on 96. So, back in December 2018, I took a 2-week vacation. I flew from Birmingham all the way to Cancun, which is right here. This was a return ticket on TUI for about £360 sterling. It was given a discount because of the Black Friday sales. Now, I could have actually spent 2 weeks in Mexico, but I thought, no, I'm going to do a dream I've wanted to do. I've wanted to travel through Central America. So I went Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. I didn't end up going to Panama because of the time constraints. I had 2 weeks. Like 2 days before my flight back to the United Kingdom, I flew from San Jose, Costa Rica back to Cancun, even though that cost me like £150 sterling. As long as I was able to get on the flight back to the United Kingdom, that was fine. Now, in 2019, like 4 months before the whole world shut down in 2020, I flew from Paris, France to Cayenne, French Guyana, like a 9-hour domestic flight. This cost me a total of £288 sterling because I was charged in euros, so it was like roughly, 320, 330 euros. I got myself 2 weeks to travel to Suriname, Guyana, and the northern part of Brazil, the Anambra State. Now, let's just say you're a United Kingdom resident and you want to go somewhere on the cheap. For around 300 quid in cheap seasons, you can actually go to this little island here called Barbados in like the West Indies. Or for about 400, you could go from any of these major cities in the United Kingdom to Punta Cana at the very edge of the Dominican Republic. So if you've got a week or two in the Dominican Republic, you can cross into Haiti, or for cheaper, you can actually fly from Dominican Republic to Colombia for about 50 to 70 quid each way. There's not that many cheap flights to go to other places in the Caribbean once you're in here. Like, I looked at going from Dominican Republic to Jamaica. That was going to be 200 round trip, and also, if you're flying like between all these islands in the Caribbean, you're going to be paying about 150 a ticket each way, depending on the season. So the cheapest way to find cheap flights is simply Skyscanner. You basically put the nearest airport where you live, and you could basically just select everywhere, and it'll tell you how much it's going to cost you to fly from A to B. Like, I've got a couple of trips I want to plan soon. All right, my initial plan would be, I'd take a cheap flight to Spain from Madrid. Then, from Spain to Cuba, I can get to Havana for 200 quid one way. But I need an onward ticket to all these other countries, so I could go from Cuba to Colombia for about 60 quid one way. I mean, I still would have to probably buy a flight from Colombia to Spain to get into the country. But I mean, once you're in Colombia, you've got 90 days. You could literally explore all these different nations. You could take a bus to Venezuela. You could fly down to the you call it the Amazon River, and there's 3 countries that border each other: Peru, Brazil, and Colombia. You could get a bus from Bogota to Quito in Ecuador. I mean, you could literally, in the space of a week, if you're up for it, you can go from Colombia all the way to Peru without flying, just in a matter of buses and all. But then, literally, you still have to stick to immigration requirements of having a return flight out. So it's either like you either buy a return ticket, which gives you like a month, like in the area, or you basically, you could wing it. You could basically like do one of those renter flights, where basically you pay a third party to give you a ticket that's good for a couple of days, just to show immigration that yes, you have a flight out of Colombia. Now, I went from Paris to South Africa last year for a total of £360 sterling on Kenyan Airways. I booked this flight thanks to Skyscanner. I couldn't find that price going on Kenyan Airways because I'd charge a bit more. So what I had to do was take a bus from London to Paris, cost about like 30-40 quid one way, or last time I went to Paris for a few days cost me 66 return. I took a flight from Charles de Gaulle Airport to Nairobi, Kenya, which literally, I nearly missed my flight to Johannesburg. I had no Kenyan visa, and I would have been screwed if I didn't make that flight. So then my flight continued from Kenya to Johannesburg, and I spent like a whole month within southern Africa. I went to Lesotho, Eswatini. I went from Joburg to Cape Town, 18 hours, and from Cape Town to Windhoek, Namibia. I went up the Kavivi Strip to Botswana, and then across the Zambezi River to Zambia, across the Victoria Falls into Zimbabwe, took a bus back down to Pretoria. I didn't go to Mozambique because I was really skeptical about them, but how I didn't have a visa or if I could get it for like 50 quid, and I've been warned that Mozambique is a really corrupt country, but I still had to deal with corruption on the South African border. Now, if you're wanting to stay, like, not far away from Europe, right, I once flew from the UK to Georgia, and then that was like for 50 quid, that was 6 years ago, and then I flew from Georgia to Kazakhstan for 200 return. It could be much like cheaper like these days, but like going from Georgia to Kazakhstan allowed me to go to Kyrgyzstan. Fortunately, I only had a week, so I couldn't go to other places like Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, or even Afghanistan, but I do know that Wizz Air, they are flying, like, they have some really... A lot of these Wizz Air flights, they tend to, like, leave from Abu Dhabi in the UAE, and they go to places like Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan. But, like, I don't understand, like, why. Well, I mean, they can't have good connections from, like, Europe. I mean, despite the war going on in Ukraine, I remember one time I was at Kiev Airport 7 years ago. I saw people getting on flights to Kazakhstan and Thailand. So, like, that's like the flight route, but that was like, way before the war times. You can actually... Wizz Air sometimes has flights from Hungary, Budapest, all the way to Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan, or how they call it, Nur-Sultan, something like that. You could get a return flight for about 150 quid, 100 quid. Okay. So, let's just say if you wanted to be like an overlander type of like person, okay? And you wanted to get to Africa, what you could do is you could buy a cheap flight from United Kingdom to Spain, to Malaga, what you say it. And then literally, you've got like a short bus trip to Gibraltar, and then for about €30 you can get a ferry across to Morocco. So I mean, once you're in Morocco, like all roads lead around through Africa. I mean, you can drive through Southern Sahara into Mauritania, see the Iron Ore train that Michael Pound took on, go through Senegal, the Gambia, all these really interesting countries like Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Ivory Coast, Ghana. I wouldn't go, like, literally, I hear that there's, like, no proper roads between Nigeria and Cameroon, and also, when you're doing a travel like this, like, you tend to spend a lot more money on visas, because once you, like, leave the Gambia, you literally have to, and Senegal, you literally have to pay money to get into a lot of these countries, which is, it can be cheap and it can be expensive. I mean, I once bought a visa for Ghana a couple of years ago, but then the pandemic happened and I couldn't go to Ghana, so I wasted £100. Now, another example about traveling in East Africa is like you could fly from like what the UK to East Africa for around like 350 quid, or like literally you could literally visit most African nations roughly 400 quid like return. Could be a bit cheaper if you go from France. So literally like your possibilities are endless. Like with Spain, sometimes you can actually get cheaper flights from Spain to Latin America rather than from the United Kingdom to Latin America. Uh, I would prefer to go like take a bus to France and then be able to get on a flight to any of these French-speaking African nations, depending on how much they cost. When I first travelled to Europe many years ago, I spent $1,800 to fly from Sydney to China to the United Kingdom for 19 days. And then when I moved to the United Kingdom, I only spent like 600 quid to go from Australia to Malaysia, spent a few days in Malaysia, and then a cheap flight from Malaysia to London via Vietnam. I've done that twice. If I wanted to go back to Australia now, it would probably cost me 500-ish, 600 quid return. If I wanted to go, let's just say, somewhere Southeast Asia, I'd be expecting to pay about like 300 to 400 quid return fare. This year I flew from the United Kingdom to Sofia for 20 quid, and then I travelled all the way to Croatia. Then I flew back to the United Kingdom for a tenner, because like that's how like cheap flights are. But you just have to figure out like what days you want to fly. Like it'd be cheaper to fly on a Tuesday. Because I remember this one year, right, like I took flights. I always flew on a Tuesday to go to Norway or Italy or Lithuania or Iceland. Like actually, I did go to Iceland on a Monday, but that's reasonable and all. Yeah, and also there are flights literally going to literally nearly everywhere from the United Kingdom. Like I can tell you that there are direct flights from the UK to like Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Peru, and Colombia. And I know that for sure. There's definitely direct flights to all these Caribbean islands, but some of them is basically like you'll fly from United Kingdom to Barbados for refueling, and then go on to like St. Lucia or Guyana. I once heard that it cost like £1,000 to fly from France to Haiti, which I thought was ridiculously stupid. I mean, if you're in France, you could have gone from France to, we call it Dominican Republic, and then for like less than 20 quid or 20 euros, or 50 euros, depending on how you get there, you could get a bus across the border. Interesting enough, in Cuba, there's a little town, like a resort town, Valadero. Sometimes it's much cheaper to fly from there than it is to like Havana, because there's a direct flight from Manchester to Cuba once a week. So once you get to Valadero, you can easily get a bus to Havana. And so in the Middle East, you could literally get to any of these countries for at least about 100 to 300 quid. I mean, I'm sure you could get from the UK to Israel for roughly 100 quid, depending on like what airline you fly. You could get to the UAE for 200 quid. You can get to Saudi Arabia for less than 200 quid. I once went to Lebanon for a weekend, and I spent a total of £90 sterling to fly from Cyprus to Lebanon. So you think about it like this way: you go from the United Kingdom to either Paphos or Larnaca in Cyprus, and then from Cyprus you can cheaply get to like Egypt, Israel, Iraq, and even also Jordan as well. I mean, when like if you were to go to Jordan, you could easily overland it to Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Syria, depending on your travels. Ryanair and Wizz Air, they're always liking to find like new destinations to get to. I mean, there's always Ryanair flights to Morocco for what 20-ish quid from the UK. Yeah, so this explains in detail what I've been paying for like the last couple of years to travel to different locations. I mean, I've taken many trips, from the United Kingdom, and I've gone all the way to like Turkey or Bulgaria, or back in the day, I remember it cost me 160 Australian dollars to get from Australia to Hong Kong. Then I paid 250 to go to Vladivostok. I spent 96 pounds sterling on a train ticket to Moscow, and then literally it cost me about 200 quid to get back to the UK on like buses and boats, because like I went to Finland, I took a ferry to Sweden, and then I traveled down south, and that's how I ended up in London like 7 years ago. So anyway, this is Martin Metalhead. Have fun with your travels. I'm over and out.